One of the most painful things that can happen in a relationship is realizing later that somewhere along the way you lost yourself. Not all at once, but slowly. You started adjusting, holding back what you felt, avoiding certain conversations, trying to keep the peace, trying not to create tension. And at first, it doesn't feel like losing yourself. It feels like caring. It feels like being patient, being understanding, being flexible. But over time, something starts to shift. You notice you're not saying what you actually feel. You're monitoring your tone. You're trying to predict how they'll respond. You're making yourself smaller just to keep the connection stable. And this is where something important needs to be understood. Losing yourself in a relationship doesn't usually happen because you don't know who you are. It happens because something in your nervous system starts prioritizing connection over truth. When a connection feels uncertain or fragile or like it could disappear, your system starts adapting, not because you're weak, but because connection feels important. And when something feels important, the fear of losing it can become very powerful. You might feel it in your body, a tightness before bringing something up, a hesitation before being honest, a subtle pressure in your chest when you sense they might pull away. So instead of saying what's true, you soften it or delay it or completely avoid it. And every time you do that, you move slightly further away from yourself. And this doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes losing yourself looks like saying it's fine when it isn't, pretending you're okay with less than what you need, over explaining so they don't misunderstand you, or staying quiet because you don't want to be too much. And none of this usually comes from bad intentions. It often just comes from fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood, fear that if you fully show what you feel, the connection might not survive it. So instead of expressing yourself authentically, you start managing yourself. And there's a difference. Managing yourself means editing your truth, monitoring your emotions, trying to make your needs more acceptable so the other person doesn't pull away. Expressing yourself means staying connected to what's true and bringing it forward with steadiness, not pressure, not blame, but honesty. And that can be difficult when your system is scared because fear makes honesty feel dangerous, even when honesty is what the relationship actually needs. So imagine this: something hurts you, they become distant, they cancel plans, they say something that lands wrong. And part of you wants to say, hey, that affected me. But another part of you says, don't bring it up. You'll just make it worse. You'll seem needy. You'll just push them away. So you stay quiet. And on the outside, nothing happens. But on the inside, you start carrying resentment. You start feeling unseen. You start hoping they'll notice what you haven't said. And that creates a painful dynamic because now you're expecting someone to understand something that you haven't fully expressed. Not because you're trying to be unfair, but because your system didn't feel safe enough to bring it forward. And this is where losing yourself becomes confusing. Because part of you knows that you're not being fully honest, but another part of you feels like honesty could cost you the connection. So you choose connection again and again until eventually you don't feel fully present in the relationship anymore. You feel anxious, tense, careful, like you're always trying to hold something together or like you're walking on eggshells. And that's not love, that's self abandonment. Now, self abandonment doesn't always mean doing something extreme, sometimes it's subtle. It's repeatedly leaving your own truth to keep access to someone else. And this is where grounded masculinity becomes important because grounded masculinity is not about controlling the relationship. It's not about forcing the other person to meet you where you are. It's about staying connected to yourself while you're connected to someone else. That means knowing what you feel without being controlled by it, having needs without apologizing for having them, speaking honestly without turning honesty into pressure, and being willing to let the connection reveal itself instead of abandoning yourself to preserve it. You can usually feel this difference in your body. When you're abandoning yourself, your body feels contracted. There's tightness, there's hesitation, there's a sense of holding yourself back. But when you're connected to yourself, even if you're uncomfortable, there's more alignment. You may still feel nervous, but there's less pretending, less hiding, less performing. And that matters because the goal isn't to become someone who never adapts, because relationships require flexibility, they require patience, they require care for the other person. But flexibility becomes self abandonment when you keep bending away from your truth to avoid losing the connection. So, if you ever looked back at a relationship and realized I wasn't fully myself there, don't just shame yourself for it. Look deeper. Ask yourself what felt unsafe. Ask what you were afraid would happen if you were honest. Ask what part of you believed you had to disappear a little just to keep the connection. Because that's where the real work actually begins. Not in blaming yourself, but in learning how to stay with yourself while loving someone else. Because real connection should not require you to abandon your own center. And the more grounded you become, the less you confuse losing yourself with loving deeply.